The schos of having him, so it's a big schos to have him here. And the shir is also being sponsored by Shul.com and with our friend from our chaver Jonathan, Mr. Dagmi. And the mic on the back is not on. The speaker is in the back. Okay. So. Okay, I think if can you hear back there? Okay. Okay. I don't want to take anyone's more time. We're here to hear Rabbi Krohn, so it's a pleasure to call on Rabbi Krohn to give us the divrei chizuk. Thank you very much.
To tell you the truth, I didn't think so many people live in Miami. I can't get over this crowd. It's amazing. It is such a great zchus to have been invited by the two Rosh Hashivas, Rabbi Bledger and Rabbi Singer, and of course by my new dear friend Jonathan. I'll get to pronounce his last name right, Dagby. But it is just wonderful to be here. I've been here in this Paysach Knesset numerous times before, but we've come at a very, very moving and important time during the year, and hopefully we'll all be able to be inspired together. Okay? In 1903, a very great Rebbe passed away. That was the Sfas Emes, the second Ger Rebbe. Rahman al-Itzlan, he didn't live a long life. He only lived to be 56 years old. He was born in 1847, he died in 1903. But at his Levaya, an incredible conversation took place, and that's going to be our theme for tonight. At his Levaya, his son, Rabbi Avram, who would be the next Ger Rebbe, the Imrei Emes, was talking to his brother Rabbi Tzalel, and he said, at least our father, the Sfas Emes, had Arichas Yomim. Arichas Yomim means length of days. So Rabbi Tzalel said, what are you talking about? He only lived to be 56. That's not Arichas Yomim. So the Sfas Emes said, so the Imrei Emes said, I didn't say that he had Arichas Shonim. I said that he had Arichas Yomim. Arichas Shonim is length of years. Arichas Yomim is length of days. No one in the world, any place, can guarantee for themselves Arichas Shonim. No one knows what tomorrow brings. But every single one of us here, and all the thousands that will be watching this presentation, every one of us can guarantee in our lives Arichas Yomim. Arichas Shonim is in the Eibishter's hands. Arichas Yomim is in our hands. We've come together during the days of counting, during the days of Sfira. And every Yid, every Ben Torah has to know that it's not only a question of counting the days, but it's making the days count. Making every day worthwhile, accomplishing every single day. And that's what it means to make every day count. And that's how a person gets to have Arichas Yomim. So I want to ask you a question. I know there are many Bnei Torah here, and obviously this is a kasha that is asked by many Mefarshim. We know that any mitzvah that you do once in a while, you make Shechiyanu. So how come we don't say Shechiyanu when we first count Sfira? We say Shechiyanu by Matzah, Chanukah, Sukkah, Megillah. Why don't we make a Shechiyanu when we start counting Sfira? So there are two tremendous answers, and they are both from the opposite end of the spectrum. If you take a look at the last run in Psachim, the last run, and he says something amazing. He said, Shalom Matzinu Birchas Zman. We don't find that you say Shechiyanu, Ela B'Dova Sheyesh Bo Shum Hano, by something that has great pleasure. When you pick up that lulav and esrog for the first time, or you bench Chanukah the first night, or you sit in the sukkah, or you eat the matzah, of course there's tremendous, tremendous joy, and so therefore, of course, it makes sense to say Shechianu. But really, if you're thinking about the bracha that you're saying, Al Sfiras HaOmer, really, it could evoke sadness, because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. We can't bring the carbon Omer. So here you're making a bracha Al Sfiras HaOmer, and it evokes an idea of sadness, so you can't say Shechianu. So in my humble opinion, I believe that that's why, what is the first phrase that we use right after you say the bracha, Sfiras HaOmer? Harachmanu Yachzalonu Tzavodas Beis HaMikdash L'Mkayma. Where did that come from? I think it comes from this Ran. That this idea, the fact that we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, and it evokes the sadness, so that's the reason why we say that Harachmanu Yachzalonu Tzavodas Beis HaMikdash, that the Eibusha should bring back the Beis HaMikdash for us. However, the Bnei Yisoscha has a totally different approach. And the Bnei Yisoscha writes like this. The reason that we don't say Shechianu is because what's important is not the counting of the days, but getting to the end of those days, getting to Shavuos. Al kain ein ana mavarcha Shechianu al mitzvah sfira. Ki ein hatshuka al yom hanisparim. The main desire is not the counting of the days, but the yom achar hasfira, the days after the sfira, when you come to Shechianu. And you've elevated yourself, and you've worked on yourself, as we're going to talk about, how to become that hecher mensch, that higher person by Shavuos, then you're going to say Shechianu. And it's so interesting to me that Rabbeinu Bechaya in Parshas Emor writes in Vayikra Chav Gimel Pasuk Tazayin that Paysach, the Yontif of Paysach, is not an entity in itself. It's only a haschala. And the expression that he uses is that the Yomim HaNisparim, those days that are counted till Shavuos, are Chol HaMoed. So he says that's why Shavuos is called Atzeres. Why is Shmini Atzeres called Atzeres? Because it's the last day of the 8 days of Yontif, of Sukkot, so it's called Atzeres. So Shavuos is also an Atzeres. Because you're supposed to work on yourselves. We're supposed to work on ourselves throughout these 49 days. So these days are Chol HaMoed, then comes Atzeres. That's what Shavuos is all about. So if that's the case, so according to the Bnei Yisoscha, and according to Rabbeinu Bechaya, these are days of Hachana, these are days of preparation, these are days that we have to elevate ourselves. So what path are we going to take on these days of elevation? So once again, the Bnei Yisoscha says something that is so incredible that if you never heard it, your mamash have to fasten your seatbelt. You won't believe this. The Bnei Yisoscha asked the question, why is Sfira 49 days? Where did that come from? Why not 39? Why not 40, 59, 69, 17, 19? Where does 49 come from? And listen to what he says. He says that there's a Mishnah in Avos. In Perek Beis Mishnah Tes, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was sitting with all his Talmidim, and he asked them a question, and think what you would answer if you were asked such a question. Ezer derech yeshara sheyidbak boha adam. What is the finest and the most prominent characteristic that a yid should have? So the first Talmud, Rabbi Lezer said, Rabbi, I believe everybody should have an ayin toiva, a good eye. Don't be jealous. There's some people that have more mazel than you. Some people have more money than you. Some people are wealthier than you. Don't be jealous. Have an ayin toiv. Be happy for people. That's what one Mandiyama said. Another Mandiyama said, you should be a chover toiv, a good friend. All of us here have many acquaintances. Not many have very, very good friends. Be a good friend. Be a loyal friend, a chover toiv. And another Mandiyama says, shochin toiv. Be a good neighbor. However, Rabbi Lezer ben Aroch said, Rebbe, you know what I believe that every person should have? Every person should be a leiv toiv. Have a good heart. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai heard that, he said, that's the one that's right. You know why? Because if you have a leiv toiv, you're going to be a shachin toiv, you're going to have an ayin toiv, and you're going to be a chaver toiv. Now listen to this. The Bnei Yissaschar says leiv is b'gematria 32, lamed and beis. Toiv is b'gematria 17. 32 and 17 is 49. That's why there's 49 days. The reason there are 49 days is because these are the days, as we come to the hachana of Kabbalas HaTorah, we have to develop within ourselves a leiv toiv. And that's why we have the 49 days. And if that's the case, so we have to understand that we have to grow. So let's listen to some stories. What does it mean when a person has a leiv toiv? I think the common denominator between all the stories that you're about to hear is that none of these people thought about themselves. They were thinking about other people. And that's what I believe a leiv toiv is. He's thinking of other Yidden. If you look in the Hagdama of the Nefesh HaChaim from Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner, he didn't write the Hagdama. His son, Rabbi Itzela Volozhiner, wrote the Hagdama. And in there, he says that his father always told him, Loi la'atzmoi nivra. You are not created for yourself. The Eibishter didn't bring you into this world that you should become rich and famous. The Eibishter brought you in this world, the expression that he uses, lahoyil la'achrini, to help other people. Every single one of us here tonight has different talents. And every one of us was given those talents, not for ourselves, but to see what you could do for somebody else. So let me give you some examples. This story happened in a shul, in a Sephardic shul in Yerushalayim. There was a Rav there who would get up every day to give a shiur to 15 balabatim at 6:30 in the morning. He gave a shiur till 7:15, and at 7:15 they davened. But there was one Sephardic person who he really didn't understand learning, but he wanted to be meitiv lachrini. He wanted to help, and he recognized the godless of those people who get up early to learn. So he would come every morning, he would come to the kitchen, and he prepared coffee and tea for all the 15 people. But of course, everybody wanted something different. This guy wanted decaffeinated coffee, this guy wanted 99 milk, this guy wanted red milk, this guy wanted coffee with sugar, this guy wanted coffee with Splenda. So he had a list for everybody. And that's chongefangen with the tea. This guy wants herbal tea. This guy wants regular tea. And this guy comes from England, so he wants tea and milk, right? So everybody had something else. And this guy had a whole list. And every morning as the shiur started, he would walk in with his sheet and give everybody their coffee and tea. But he gave everybody only a half a cup. Half a cup of coffee and a half a cup of tea. And people said to him, Rabbi Yid, if you're kind enough already, you're giving us the tea and the coffee, why don't you give us a full cup? We all would like a full cup. That's what I'm doing. I'm in the kitchen. I'm right there. You need meat? Just call me. I'll bring you in the rest of it. Only a half a cup. Nobody could switch him. One day he woke up, he wasn't feeling so well. So he goes into his son's room, who'd usually daven in another shul, and he says, listen, I feel terrible to wake you. I know you daven later, but I've got to give these people who come to learn their coffee and tea. Would you mind? Here, I got a whole list. Just bring the coffee and tea for everybody before they start the shiur. He says, Abba, yeah, for sure. I'll be happy to do it. The kid comes to shul. He comes early. He sets up according to the chart, the tea and the coffee, and he's about to walk into the Beis Medrash, and he sees his father. He says, Abba, what are you doing here? I thought you said you don't feel well. I don't, but I forgot to tell you something. He said, what'd you forget to tell me? Only a half a cup. So what are you talking about? You only give a half a cup? Don't they want a full cup? I said, of course they want a full cup, but I only give them a half a cup. He said, why? He said, I'll tell you the reason, but don't tell anybody. He said, you see, there are two people in the shiur, old people, their hands shake, shreklach, terrible. If I gave everybody a full cup, they would pick up the cup, the water would spill all over the Gemara, all over themselves, all over other people, everybody would be upset, they would be embarrassed. Like this, I give everybody a half a cup, they could shake from Heint bis Morgen till tomorrow, nothing's going to happen. And if I give everybody a full cup and then a half a cup, and then a half a cup, they'll also be insulted. Like this, everybody gets a half a cup. Who thinks like that? who thinks like that. That's somebody who's meitiv lachrini. He's not thinking about himself. He knows people are criticizing him because he's only giving a half a cup, but he doesn't want to embarrass those two individuals. Now, in New York, many, many years ago, there was a wonderful person. Many of you certainly know his name. His name was Rabbi Elimelech Tress. He was executive vice president of Agudas Yisrael. He was the one who ran the Aguda office in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg. So he has a wonderful, wonderful son, Tzvi, who moved to Miami a while ago. He was basically in Toronto, a tremendous askin. And he told me one day he was in one of the Miami shuls, and he was davening, he had his talis bag on the table, and a Satmar Chassid, guy with long payas and a beard, up turned hat, and he sees the name Tress on the talis bag. He says, "Die heißt Tress? Your name is Tress?" He said, "Yeah." He says, "Tamul gehört von Elimelech Tress? You ever heard of Elimelech Tress?" He said, "That was my father." And the Satmar guy stopped in his tracks and he started crying. So Tzvi said to him, "You knew my father?" He said, "Let me tell you a story." He said, more than 50 years ago, I came to Williamsburg. 50 years ago, long before Satmar what it is today. I came from Europe, I didn't have a job. I came to Satmar on Bedford Avenue, and I said, "Chevra, I need a job." And nobody was able to get me a job. I didn't have food on the table. I had a wife and 2 kids, and we were starving. So somebody said to me, "Why don't you go down further on Bedford Avenue? There's an Aguda office, Agudas Yisrael office, and there's a guy, Mike Tress, and he likes to help people." He said, "I heard of him, but I'm Satmar. I'm not going to Aguda, right? You know, a different ashkofas." And he said, "This guy doesn't have a beard. I'm going to go get, a favor from a guy who doesn't have a beard, right?" I don't know if he would talk to me, but okay, whatever. But the point is, so for 2 weeks he didn't go and he was starving. Then finally he decided, okay, he's got to go. So he comes in to the office, and Rabbi Elimelech Tress sees this fellow never saw him before. He said, "Could I help you?" He said, "Rabbi Elimelech, they tell me that you like to help people. I'm desperate. I don't have a job. I have a wife and 2 kids. I can't even put food on the table on Shabbos." He said, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm a glazier. I fix windows and I could put in glass where it has to be done. So you know anybody?" He said, "Yeah, of course. A couple blocks away on Marcy Avenue, there's a guy who's a glazier. I happen to know that he needs somebody. Here, take this note, give it to him, and tell him I sent you. And I'm telling you, he's going to take you. I just happened to find out recently that he needs somebody." Fine, he goes there, a couple blocks away. Sure enough, he gives the guy the note, and the guy says, "Yeah, of course, I need somebody." And he gives him a job. He says to my cousin Tzvi Tress, he says, "That Friday, I was able to go to a store and buy food for Shabbos. I couldn't believe it." And then the next week, and then every week he paid me on time. I felt like a human being. I was able to come home and bring food to my wife and kids. He said, after 2 months, my boss calls me in. And he says, "Go to Mike Tress and tell him he doesn't have to give me any more money. I'm going to pay your salary myself from now on. You're a great worker." Imagine that. That was on the note. On the note was, "I don't know this guy, but he needs a job. I'll pay his salary. You just hire him. Don't tell him I'm paying for it, and you take care of him." That's a leif toif. That's a leif toif. It's unbelievable. And I'll tell you a story now. You could chalish from it. It's one of the greatest stories ever. In Eretz Yisrael, in Hanof, there's a family, not a well-to-do family, but a very, very tight-knit family. And every year, they go on a vacation, and every year, they give the kids, the 7 kids, they give them an itinerary. This is where we're going to go. Don't ask on the way that we should go in other places. This is what we can afford. And we're not going to any restaurants, right? We're not going to go to any of these eateries because they're very, very expensive. And they give each of the kids some spending money. They rented a SUV or whatever. They didn't have a car themselves. And they start going. And he tells the kids, this year we're going to go jeeping in Tveria. We're going to go on a boat ride on the Kinneret. And it'll be wonderful. And mommy's making all the lunches and all the snacks. The first day they start traveling north. And they come to Netanya. Netanya is beautiful. It's on the water. They get out of the car, they have picnic tables, and they all sit down to eat. After they're finished eating, the father says, okay, everybody in the car, we got a long trip. We're going up to Tveria. And little 7-year-old Zevi says, Abba, I can't get in the car. He says, why not? He says, I need the bathroom. I have to use the facilities. Father says, there's no bathrooms here. Look at this place. It's just picnic tables. He said, Abba, you said it's a long trip. I'm not going to make it up there. So the father looks around and he sees like a block away, in the distance of a block away, there's a restaurant. Now he knows nobody who owns a restaurant wants people to come in and use the facilities without buying anything. But what's he supposed to do? So they get everybody in the car, they drive up to that restaurant, and he goes into the restaurant, and there's a waitress standing at the door. She says, can I help you? And the father says, ma'am, I'm so sorry, but we're not coming to buy anything. We have a very long trip to Tveria. My little boy needs the bathroom. Do you mind if he'll use the facilities, and then he'll come out quickly, and then we'll leave? She looks around the whole restaurant. She says, okay, make it quick. The little boy goes to the back. He does what he has to do. Now he's coming out. The father meets him in the middle of the restaurant, and they're about to leave. Just as they are about to leave, the Israeli waiter, Rafi, who's got a raging temper, runs over to them and says, who gave you permission to come in here? All you guys are the same. You come inside, you don't buy anything, you use the facility. Who gave you permission to come in here? And this father's thinking, if I say that waitress who's standing on the side, watching, and she's trembling because she knows this guy could fire her, and if he says that she let him in, she's going to be in trouble. He's got to think fast. Now listen to this. Some of you, the B'nai Torah here, will know that in Eretz Yisrael there was a great tzaddik who passed away a little while ago. His name was Rabbi Avram Genachovsky. Svarim have been written about his Midas Tovos. So this father was a former Talmud of this Rabbi Avram Genachovsky. He's thinking in a flash, what would my Rebbe do here? And he says to this Rafi on the spot, he says, what are you yelling for? You're yelling for no reason. He said, what do you mean? He says, we're all coming in here to eat. He says, who's coming in here to eat? He says, me, my little boy, and we got, 6 other kids in the car, my wife. He says, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. He said, don't be sorry. Just set the tables. The guy says, I got to set 2 tables for 9 people. And he sets the tables. And this kid goes out. The father sends him to the car and says, Abba said that we got to come in. And the mother doesn't believe him. They never were in the restaurant in their lives. But they all come in and they sit him down. These kids, they never saw food like this. They never saw prices like this. They never saw a menu in their life. And they're eating. And the mother says, everybody can have 1 dish and 1 drink. Fine. When they finish, the father says, I'd like to pay. I'd like to pay. So the waiter comes over and he gives him a bill. And but before he opens the bill, the owner of the restaurant comes over to him and says, I want to tell you something that happened when you guys sat down. See that waitress? She came into the kitchen and she was crying. I said to her, what are you crying about? She said, some family just did something for me in my life. Nobody ever did anything like that for me. And he told us what happened. You weren't going to buy anything. You weren't going to bring your kids in because you wanted to save her embarrassment. And so you guys sat down. So the waiter now gives the bill to the father. And then he says, before you open the bill, I just want to get you some dessert. And he says, well, we didn't order dessert. That's a mistake. And the owner says, for special people, we want to do something very special. And they bring him ice cream and cake with sparklers, and they deliver it to the table. Now the owner comes over, and he sees that the bill is on the table, and he takes away the bill. And he says, you don't have to worry. The next time you come back here, it'll be 50% off. Just let's leave it at that. He said, no, but I want to pay for today. Listen what the owner said. He said, in this restaurant, we have a policy. We only charge people. We don't charge malachim. Imagine that. We don't charge malachim. And that's how we could all become we can all become these special people. We can all develop our Lev Tov. And if that's the case, that's one of the ways that we can make that every day should count. Now I want to tell you something that the Chofetz Chaim says. Take a look at Avas Chesed, Perek Yud Beis. The Chofetz Chaim writes, Uma'oid, tzorech li zoher, shelo yechsa lo midas ha-chesed afilu yoim echad mimei chayav. From tonight on, if you still can, and certainly from tomorrow, not one day should go by that you don't do a chesed for another person. I'm not talking a husband for a wife for a husband. That you got to do if you know what's good for you. I'm talking about out of the house. So people say, oh, doesn't charity begin at home? Yeah, but you're not a big tzaddik just because you bought your wife flowers on Friday. And she's not a big tzaddik because she made you coffee in the morning. We're talking about a chesed. But you know what the Chofetz Chaim also says? You want to have achana. You want to make every day count. It's two things. It's not only the Lev Tov that we spoke about, and that's what the Chofetz Chaim mentions first, about doing a chesed every day, but making sure there's kviyas itim la Torah. Now, of course, when you're talking to people that are learning in a kollel, so they're learning every day. But what about when they're on vacation? And what about balabatim who don't learn in a kollel? Every day there has to be an inyan of limud Torah. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Aaron writes something incredible. In the Mishnah's Rabbi Aaron writes, "V'hamem ches yomim hem keneged mem ches hadvorim shehaTorah niknes b'hem." Also, another reason why is Sfira 49 days. Because there are 48 ways to be kind of Torah, as the Mishnah tells us in Perek Vav and Avos. So Rabbi Aaron writes, every day we should be excelling in one more midah of Kinyan HaTorah for 48 days. On the 49th day is a day of total Kedusha when you go over all the other 48, and that's how you walk in to Shavuos. So there are two things in the Hachana of Shavuos and Kabbalas HaTorah. Of course, we're counting higher. We go higher, Zokta B'nai Yisascha. It's not like if you win a lottery and I tell you you're going to win the lottery in 20 days, you're going to count 19, 18, 17, you can't wait till you get it. It's just the opposite. You're counting because every day you're going higher in Chesed and in Torah. So I want to tell you something very interesting. Again, the Talmidei Chachamim here, they know the Sefer Kovetz HaOros. And in the Kovetz HaOros, which Rabbi Chanan wrote on Shas, he writes a story that happened with him and his Rabbi, the Chofetz Chaim. He said he once went in to see the Chofetz Chaim, his Rabbi, and he asked him this question. We all know the famous Paysach, it's a famous song today, Vayevose Yankev Levadei Vayovek Ishimoy Adalois Hashacha. The Malach fought with Yaakov. So Rabbi Chanan asked the Chofetz Chaim, if the Malach, the Satan, wanted to get rid of Klal Yisrael, why didn't he fight with Avram? Why didn't he fight with Yitzchak? Why did he wait to fight Dafka with Yaakov? And the Chofetz Chaim gave him a fabulous answer. And he gave it to him in Yiddish, and Rabbi Chanan writes it in Yiddish, and I'm going to repeat it in Yiddish because I love the language, but of course I'll translate. And he said, and he wrote this when the Chofetz Chaim was still alive, because he writes in this Kovetz HaOros, the Chofetz Chaim Shlita, V'chein shamati mepeh kodesh Rabbeinu HaChofetz Chaim Shlita b'zeh haloshen. The Yetzirah sa'artem nit, ayid ken fasten, ken weinen, ken davnen, a ganze Tag abinit lernen. The Satan, the Malach Hamovas, they don't care. You could daven, you could fast, you could do anything you want as long as you don't learn. The kiyum of Klal Yisrael is this kollel. The kiyum of Klal Yisrael is making a commitment to learn every day. Avada Tefillah is great. Chesed is great. That's what Avram was. Yitzchak was Yireh Shamayim. That's great. But that's not how Klal Yisrael continues. Klal Yisrael continues only through learning. And that's why tonight, every single one of us here has to make a commitment to learning more than they learned before. Now it's a new Zman. We're coming now in the days of Chol HaMoed, so to speak, as Rabbeinu Bechaya says. We're coming from Paysach till Shavuos. We have to figure out how can we learn more than we've been learning till now. If you never learned Mishnayos, maybe start making a Seder Mishnayos. If you haven't picked up a Sefer of Musar in years, now's the time to do it. Maybe Amud Yomi and Daf Yomi. And if a person can't get Sipuk out of the Daf Yomi, let him learn an Amud Yomi. But there's no such thing as not learning every day. That's exactly what the Chavetz Chaim was talking about. Everyday learning and everyday a chesed. So now, I want to share with you an incredible story. You see, many people, and I know I was like this as a teenager when I was learning in Torah Das. You know, many times you have Chalishas Hadas. You're sitting in a Beis Medrash, there are guys that are smarter than you, they're faster than you, and they could pick up learning, and they seem to remember. Where do they get these memories that they remember everything? And a person could have Chalishas Hadas. We've all gone through this, most of us. Except Rabbi Bledger and Rabbi Singer, but most of us, right? But otherwise, listen to this story. There's a great book that was written, it's called In Search of Greatness. Rabbi Shlomo Freifeld, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, said many shmuzin, and Rabbi Reinman of Lakewood took those shmuzin and he wrote them up. And he tells over this story, that in the early 1950s, Rabbi Freifeld was a young man, he went to visit the Chazon Ish. He had a whole bunch of questions that he wanted to ask him about learning and Musar and everything. And he writes that when he got into the room of the Chazon Ish, he got lockjaw. He couldn't talk. He was so intimidated by being in front of the Gadol Hador, he could not say a word. And then he writes, or he says in the Shmuzin, I couldn't say a word. But the Chazon Ish started speaking to me. And listen to what the Chazon Ish told him. The Chazon Ish said that the Gedolim of previous generations were not geniuses. And then he mentions 3 names. Now, I called Rabbi Reiman when I read this. And I said, tell me who said those 3 names. Was it the Chazon Ish who said the 3 names, or Rabbi Freifeld said the 3 names? He said to me, I have listened to that shmuz 10 times, and I still can't figure out who was the one who said those 3 names. Whether it was the Chazon Ish who gave these examples, which you won't believe, or it was Rav Freifeld. But Rav Freifeld is also a Bar Samchan. You know which 3 he said? Well, Gedolei Hador, and we're not geniuses. The Netziv, Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Inspector, the Kovner Rov, and this is the most shocking, the K'tzos HaChoshen. Imagine, the K'tzos HaChoshen was not a genius. But Rabbi Freifeld writes, and this is what I want to tell every single person. When it comes to learning, you don't have to be the biggest genius. Rabbi Freifeld writes, you have to have the 4 Ds. Desire, dedication, drive, and determination. I want to repeat those. Desire, dedication, drive, and determination. And if you have those 4 Ds, you're going to become a Talmid Chacham. And you're going to have sipuk in learning. And I'll tell you something. No matter what you do in life, whether you're a real estate broker, a graphic designer, whatever you want to do in life, you have these 4 Ds, and Be'ezus Hashem, you're going to be successful. It's not here, it's here. You have that desire, you have that determination, you're going to make it. And we all know, every one of us, men and women that are listening, think back to your high school years. And think back to your graduation book and those geniuses that you thought they were going to be the leaders. They were going to be the ones that were the biggest ones to have Hatzlacha, and it's not true. Never is it true. It's that guy who was sitting in the back. Somehow he became the leader. Somehow he became the big Askin who's accomplishing. How did that happen? So a Chassidish lady in Brooklyn, she's a principal of a Chassidish school. She once told me a great expression. She said, every child is just one caring adult away from being a success. Every child is just one caring adult of being a success. And every one of us that's here tonight probably someplace had a great Rebbe, or a woman had a great Mora, or a great father, or a great mother who believed in you. And that's how you became what you became. And that's what we have to do with our children. We have to believe in them. I remember Reb Chanina Hertzberg, Zechat Tzadik Levracha, a wonderful Manal who passed away a year and a half ago, almost 2 years already. So I remember he told me before he became a Manal, he was a Rebbe, a 5th grade Rebbe in Tveres Moshe in our neighborhood in Kew Gardens. And he was once at a chasana and he saw Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. And he said to Rabbi Yaakov, you know, there's a kid in my class, I can't reach him. I tried to explain to him so many things. What should I do? And you know what Rabbi Yaakov said to him? He told me he was so shocked. Rabbi Yaakov said to him, do you ever daven for him? Daven? He never thought of that. A Rebbe should daven for his kids? That's what it's all about. You got to care. You got to care. And if you're an adult and you see a child is struggling, and in every neighborhood we have those kids that are Yisayimim, or those kids are from single parents. You know how many single mothers cry to me? They have nobody to take their children to shul on Shabbos because the husband is someplace else and they have other kids at home. How are they going to walk the kids to shul? So who thinks about them? Some of these single family children, they don't go to shul for years. Who thinks about them? If you know anybody like that in your neighborhood, make sure you walk to that house and you bring that kid to shul and let him sit next to you. Even if it's not easy. Because every child is just one caring adult away from being a success. And now's the time to make the commitment. Right now, we're still in the early days of Sfira. We're going towards Shavuos. And you know, it's very difficult sometimes to change. You go through life in a certain way and you just can't change. So I want to tell you some great expressions about new beginnings and change. I was once in an airport someplace and I saw this fabulous poster. It's never too late to become the person that you could have been. You know that? Ever think about that? It's never too late to become the person that you could have been. We all think, oh my goodness, if only I would have started 25 years ago doing this and this, that would have been great. I'm not going to give you any personal examples, I'm too embarrassed, but whatever. If I would be doing exercise, 25 years ago, right? But the point is, we all have things that we wanted to do, but it's never too late. Here's another expression. The only impossible journey is the one you never begin. The only impossible... How are you going to learn Shas? How are you going to know Mishnayos? How are you going to know Tanakh? You start. If you don't start, you'll never know it. But you start, and you chazer, and you take it seriously. Then you're going to grow. That's really what this period of time is all about. And one more expression. There comes a day when you realize that turning the page is the best feeling in the world because you realize there's so much more to the book than the page you're stuck on. We're stuck in certain ways. And in all seriousness, that's what Rabbi Bledge and Rabbi Silva, that's what the Kollel is here about for. You come here, you can learn anytime you want. There'll always be somebody here that you can learn with. And that's why we have this keynote tonight. Because now is the time to make the change. Now is the first day of the rest of your life, as the famous expression goes. And we could all change. And we could all grow. And we can all be better. And so I want to tell you one more thing about learning that to me is very personal, and as you'll see in a moment, I feel it's such a fabulous idea. My father, Olav Shalom, also passed away at a very, very young age. My dear friend Chaim Siegel, he remembers him. Chaim used to come to my house when he was in camp. My brother and I were his counselors and learning rebbes. So he met my father. My father died, he was only 47. Now when you're 21, you think 47 is an old man. But my father was probably one of the wisest and smartest people that I ever met in my life, besides being a tremendous Talmid Chacham. And he once said a great pshat in a Pasuk in Tehillim, and he lived by it so much that when we had to write the Matzeva, I put this Pasuk on the matzeva, because this is what he lived by, and this is what we could all live by. Listen to the second pasuk in Tehillim. Ki im b'soiras Hashem cheftzai. You should have your desire in the Torah Hashem, u'b'soirasai, and in His Torah. The simple pshat is in the Eibish's Torah, yega yoyman v'layla. You should dwell day and night. So the Gemara says, and Rashi brings, that ki im b'soiras Hashem cheftzai, you should love Hashem's Torah. But if you keep on learning it, u'b'soirasai, in Zayin Torah and His Torah, the person, it becomes your Torah. But my father had an additional pshat which he lived by. And he said like this: every person has to have a miktsaya, a section in Torah that they dwell on and they love. Every person has to become an expert in some part of Torah. My father was the biggest baki in Hilchas Milah. Not only in Hilchas Milah, in the practical aspects, the medical aspects. He had every single sefer until he died that was ever written on Bris Milah. And those that he didn't have, I remember I was in the Hebrew University, I microfilmed certain old svarim for him. He knew them backwards and forwards. A person wants to learn Hilchas Tzitzis. Become the baki so that anybody here in the Kollel has a question, you'll be able to answer on Tzitzis, Mezuzah, whatever it is. And then this is how he touched it. Kiyim b'soras Hashem cheftzai. A person has to have a desire in the Eibish's Torah. U'b'sorasai. And his own Torah, his field of expertise. Oh, yega yom v'layla. You should dwell day and night. Get every sefer you can on that topic. What a great, great idea. And you know something? I remember one time I was talking about the inyan of Chazara, to review. There are a lot of people who only like to learn new stuff. But watch this Klal Yokah. You could go crazy from this. The Klal Yokah writes on the pasuk in Dvarim Dalad Tes and Yud that be careful. Pentishkach hasadvarim ha'ela. You shouldn't forget anything. You know, there are many of us here baseball fans. We can still remember the batting averages, you know, of those players that we loved 20, 30, and 40 years ago. Right? But that Tosfos that you learned 3 days ago, like what daf was it on? Right? Somehow, you know, the stuff that really means something to you, you know, you remember it. So the way to remember it is Chazara. Now listen to this. You won't believe this. And if you have a pencil and paper, you should write it down, because you just can't imagine this. The Klal Yokah writes, every time that you learn something, you're bound to forget it. But if you learn it a second time, you weaken the koyach of forgetting. So he says like this: the word shokach, to forget, is equal 328. The word zochar, to remember, is 227. 328 minus 227 is 101. The Gemara tells us in Chagiga, there's no comparison to somebody who learns 100 times to 101. What's up to 101? Because if you chazer something every time you chazer it, you're weakening the koyach hashikon. You're going to remember it. Now, if you chazer something 101 times, if you can do such a thing, you're never going to forget it. And that's what chazar is all about. So tonight, if we make a commitment to learning, whether it's Mishnayos, whether it's Musar, whether it's halacha, whatever it is, it should only be with those things that we're going to chazer and remember and keep part of us. There's another thing that I want to talk about, and that is what Rabbi Aaron asks a Gevaldika Kasha. Why did the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, why did they die during Sfira of all times? Imagine if they would have died before Rosh Hashanah in Elul. All the Rabbanim would have so many great drashas. Oi, they didn't give covet one to the other. We got to do tshuva. You know, Elul is coming, and as soon as you make tshuva, it would have been ready-made for everybody, a ready-made drasha. Why did they die during Sfira? And listen to what he says. He says, you know why they died? They died during Sfira before Shavuos. Because if you don't have covet one to the other, you cannot be the one that's going to transmit Torah to the next generation. Every father, every mother, every Rebbe, every Mora has to love their children and love their Talmidim and give them tremendous honor. And if you don't give them that covet, zeh b'zeh, you don't give them the covet that you would want for yourself, you cannot be the one that's going to transmit Torah. And that's why they died during that time. And I want to tell you, I told a story tonight by Rabbi Sitron's shul where we daven mincha. What does it mean when you have a love for a Talmud? So in Lakewood, there's a Rabbi Avram Mandelbaum. He's a Rebbe in one of the yeshivas in Lakewood in Or Yisrael. And, no, not in Or Yisrael. In Orchas Chaim. He's a principal of the 3rd and 4th grade. There are 10 third grades, and 10 4th grades. So there must be about 400 kids just in those 2 grades. So he once said at a Torah Masorah convention an adorable story. He said when a kid gets sent into class, sent into the principal, because he was sent out of class, so he has to rebuke the little boy. But then, before he sends him back to class, he always says to the boy, whatever the kid's first name is, Shlomi, David, Shimon, don't forget, I love you. And he sends the kid back to class. Never sends a kid back to class without telling him that he loves him after he rebuked him. So he told over a story that there was this one little boy who was always in the principal's office, a troublemaker. And he sent him back to class. And one day, 10 minutes after he sent the boy back to class, Rabbi Mandelbaum had to leave the office, and he sees the kid standing there. He said to him, Shimmy, what are you doing here? I sent you back to class 10 minutes ago. He said, Rebbe, you forgot to tell me you love me. Imagine that, you could cry from that. Maybe that's the reason why the kid was in the office so many times. Because nobody at home told him he loved him. I'm not asking by a raise of hands. When was the last time you told your child for no reason at all that you loved them? Think about that. Half the time you're not home when they're going to sleep. The other half the time you're not there when they're eating supper. When do you get to talk to them? On Shabbos when you fall asleep at the table? It's not a father. It's not a mother. It's not a relationship. You have to love that child, and the child has to feel loved. I'm going to tell you a very personal story. We all know that the Parsha of Shidduchim is very, very difficult, no matter who you are. So Baruch Hashem, I have 5 children, and one of my daughters had a very difficult time finding a shidduch. And those of you who have gone through the experience know after a while you blame them, they blame you, like we didn't find the shidduch, it's your fault, or whatever. If you didn't have such curly hair, guys would go out with you, something like that, whatever. All kinds of crazy excuses. One night, my daughter, Faggy, who was having a tough time, I said something I shouldn't have said to her. I felt terrible. An hour later, I went up to her room. I said, Faggy, I'm really so sorry. I shouldn't have said what I said, but I love you, right? She said, Ta, of course I know you love me. I said, how do you know I love you? He said, Ta, you know how many times you came into my room? For no reason at all. You just said, you're a millionaire because I'm your child. And that's true. Think about that. You ever go over to your child and just give them a hug and say, I am a millionaire because you're my child? When you come into the house and they're not hanging from the ceiling, you're just so happy you just walk by. You don't want to say anything. Right? But really, that's what you should be doing. And that's how you make a kesher with the child. And that's how you make a kesher with a Talmud. I want to tell you 2 more things. We'll review and then we'll end with a great story. I want you to think about this. Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 Talmidim in a period of 33 days. Like is what the 33 days are. You ever do the math? How many did he lose a day? 727 Talmidim a day. Could you imagine you're Rabbi Akiva? And they're saying, Rabbi, come to Tveria, give a hesped. This genius, the guy who had a photographic memory, you loved him. He knew Shas, give a hesped. And he finishes in Tzfas and he has to run to Tveria. Because in Tveria, there's a guy who just got engaged. And he was such a beloved Talmud in the Beis Medrash. And he finishes in Tveria, then he's got to go down to Ashkelon. Because there's a Ben Yochad who just died. And then he's got to go to Ashdod because there's a guy who just got married. And he's going from place to place. So if, let's say, you were Rabbi Akiva, I would imagine if I was Rabbi Akiva, I would say, okay, Hashem, I get it, I'm out of here. You don't want me to teach Torah? You don't want me to be the Rebbe of these Talmidim? I'll go get another job. But what did Rabbi Akiva do? That's not what he did. The Gemara tells us, and the Medrash tells us, that Rabbi Akiva went and he took, some say 5, some say 7 Talmidim. And he said, Rabbi said, we made a mistake. We only taught them Torah. We didn't teach them Midas. We have to teach them that they have to be more sensitive to each other. And then he taught them and they taught others. And the Medrash says, Umalu kol Eretz Yisrael Torah. The whole Eretz Yisrael was filled with Torah. You know what that teaches me? A lesson for life. A Yid never gives up. The last few years we've gone through very, very difficult times. COVID, Meron, Surfside just a couple miles from here, Ukraine, terrible anti-Semitism all over the world. But a Yid doesn't give up. That's why we have a kinnis like this. We have to be mechazik each other. Rabbi Akiva never gave up. Even when he saw the fox, everybody knows the Gemara at the end of Makkas. When he saw the fox on the Beis HaMikdash, where the Beis HaMikdash stood. A Yid doesn't give up. And I want to ask you something. Why did they deserve death? Where's the Midah Keneged Midah? I was always puzzled by this Gemara. You should never use the expression, I was bothered by this Gemara. No Gemara should bother you. I don't understand it. It's confounding. It's difficult to understand. And this was a typical Gemara. Yavam Samach Beis Amid Beis. Why did they die? Shalai Nogu Kavod Zeh B'Zeh. Nobody killed anybody. Nobody ate Yom Kippur. Nobody drove on Shabbos. And the Maral says a Gevaldik Wort. The Maral in Chedushi Agodas writes, Kashenoi Kavod B'Chaveiroi. When you give kavod to your friend, Dovar Zehu Etzam Achayim. That's the essence of life. If you go over and you give somebody a compliment, you make them feel special. I'm not going to ask by a raise of hands, when was the last time you went over to a Balkaira and said, Yashikayach, he did a great job? After Tazriya Matzera, you could all go over to him, whoever he is. It's not easy, right? I spoke to Balkaira this week. He told me this is the Shabbos he can't get away. That's for sure. Nobody could do it. How many times you go over to Baal Tefillah and say thank you? You didn't have to prepare it. He did, right? When you validate somebody, the Maral says you give him Chaim. If you take away kavod from a person, you're taking away Chaim. And that's why Rahman al-Islan, I believe that's why they passed away. Recently, in Mishpacha magazine, and I'm only mentioning them because they deserve the credit, because they told this remarkable story. We all know that one of the people who died in the beginning of COVID was the Heilige Novominsker Rebbe. He was a leader in Klal Yisrael. Powerful person, a great speaker in Yiddish and in English, and he led Agudas Yisrael for many, many years. So his two sons gave an interview to the writer of Mishpacha, and they were telling stories about their father. And they told this story. When Rav Hutner was the Rosh Hashiva in Chaim Berlin, the Novominsker Rebbe was a young Talmud there. And there was a boy who came to learn, from Canada, he came to learn in Chaim Berlin. And Rav Hutner was very much mechazik this out-of-town boy. One day, the uncle of this Canadian boy comes into the office of Rav Hutner and he gives him an envelope. It was obvious that there was cash in it. Rav Hutner opened it up and he said, "What's haste like? What? It's a fortune of money. Why are you giving this kind of money?" And the man in Yiddish said to Rav Hutner, he said, "What's haste? A Yid darf sich überstrengen." That means a Yid has to exert himself. He has to go beyond the call of duty. Rav Hutner was so taken by that expression that he used it in so many shmuzin. A Yid darf sich überstrengen. We have to be better than the average. We have to do more than what's expected. And the Novominsker learned that from his Rosh Hashiva and used it many, many, many times. Especially when he was ill. And he couldn't go certain places, but he went anyway. But like Yid darf sich überstrengen. And that's what we have to do in these 49 days. We have to undertake more. We have to make new beginnings. We have to elevate ourselves. We have to become that Leiv Toiv. We have to do what the Chavetz Chaim says, not only a chesed every day, but learning every day. And as the Klayoko says, everything that you learn, chazer it, review it over, and it becomes part of you. Take a chelik and Torah and make it yours, like my father would say. Let's face it, none of us are going to be Rab Chaim. And none of us are going to know Torah the way he knew it. But one thing you could take, a chelik of Torah, whether it's Hilchas Mezuzah, Hilchas Mikvah, Hilchas Kriyas, whatever you want. Take one thing and become the expert in it. That's Ubasayr Asay, Yega Yom V'Layla. We've all gone through difficult times. Don't ever, ever give up. A Yid does not give up. Rabbi Akiva did not give up. That's the lesson that we learned from Rabbi Akiva. And so I just want to end with this beautiful poem that Syrians have in their piyutim on the day of a bris. I'll read it in Hebrew, then of course I'll translate it, but I just want you to see the poetry. Ben Adam, lama tidag al adamim, v'lo tidag al hayamim, ki adamim einam oizrim, v'hayamim einam chayzrim, redoif achar haTorah v'hamitzvos, asher heim la'ad kayamim. Ben Adam, mankind, lama tidag al adamim, you're so worried about money. We're so obsessed about making money. Rav Schwab writes in one of his svarim that when he came to America from Germany, he realized what the average American balabas tries to do, to try to earn as much money as he can that he'll never in his whole life be able to spend. You ever think about that? Most of us try to make so much money, if we lived to be 170, we couldn't spend it. But we're obsessed with it. Lama tidag al adamim. We're not worried about wasting days. In the long run, money is not the thing that's going to bring you happiness. There are a lot of wealthy people who do terrible things to themselves because they're really not happy, really not feeling fulfilled. Yesterday is not coming back, and 2 weeks ago is surely not coming back. So make sure that every day counts. That's what Sfira is all about. Redoif acha haTorah v'hamitzvos asher heim la'at kayamim. That's eternal. David should help on this great night that we come together. That we should make a commitment to Torah and to mitzvahs, to make every day count, to be mechazik each other, to have a leiv toiv, and to do what the Chavetz Chaim tells us. Every day a chesed, every day learning Torah, yegiyas HaTorah, and that way we'll fulfill our potential. And then we'll be able on Shavuos to say Shechayonu, hopefully in the Beis HaMikdash from here of Yameinu. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for listening.